great meeting hall of Kepler Station floated in the darkness of space like a giant metal flower. Inside its massive walls, representatives from 50 different worlds sat in worried silence. The air buzzed with the sound of alien voices speaking in languages that had existed for thousands of years before humans ever looked up at the stars. Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood near the back of the hall, his dark uniform marking him as one of the few humans present. His weathered face showed no emotion as he listened to the reports coming from the outer rim of the galaxy. Each report was worse than the last. The Devourers had returned. Nobody really knew where the Devourers came from. Some said they were machines, built by a dead race millions of years ago. Others believed they were once living beings who had replaced their flesh with metal and circuits. What everyone agreed on was simple. When the Devourers came to your world, everything died. Council. Speaker Valterian rose from the center of the hall. The tall alien looked like a walking crystal, its body catching and reflecting the lights of the chamber. When it spoke, its voice echoed through every corner of the room. The colonies of Raxus 4, Vega 7, and New Centauri are gone. The speaker's words hit the gathered aliens like physical blows. Complete planetary consumption in each case. No survivors. No distress calls after the first day. A wave of fear rippled through the assembly. Kim Tae-ho had seen fear before, in the eyes of soldiers before battle and civilians during evacuations. But this was different. This was the fear of entire species facing extinction. The reports continued. Ships the size of moons moving between star systems. Fleets of smaller vessels that stripped planets bare of all life and resources. Worlds left as empty rocks floating in space where once billions of beings had lived and loved and dreamed. We estimate the Devourer fleet numbers into thousands. The speaker continued. Their technology far exceeds our combined military capabilities. They consume matter itself to fuel their expansion. Every world they take makes them stronger. Admiral Kim Tae-ho closed his eyes and thought of Earth, blue oceans and white clouds, cities full of people who had never seen an alien face. Children playing in parks who did not know that death was coming from the stars. His own daughter, Jion, now grown and working as an engineer on Luna Base, building the defenses that everyone said would not be enough. A new voice cut through the chamber. Commander Sethkal of the Altarian Republic was speaking, his forearms gesturing wildly. The mathematics are clear. We cannot fight them. We cannot hide from them. There is only one option that offers survival: the Great Exodus. The words seemed to hang in the air like a death sentence. Speaker Valterian nodded slowly. The Council has discussed this possibility for many cycles. Our scientists have identified several suitable galaxies beyond Devourer reach. The journey will take decades, but it is preferable to certain extinction. Kim Tae-ho felt something cold settle in his stomach. Around the hall, other representatives were nodding. The Regelians, with their blue skin and large eyes. The delegation with their insect-like features. The peaceful traders from the Kepler colonies, all of them accepting defeat before the first shot was fired. We have prepared detailed evacuation plans. The speaker's voice grew stronger, more confident. Every member species will contribute ships and resources. We estimate 90% survival rates if we begin immediately. The Andromeda Galaxy offers many suitable worlds for colonization. The hall erupted in discussion. Aliens spoke rapidly in their native tongues, calculating ship capacities and travel times. Some were already accessing their communication devices to contact their home worlds. The great machine of galactic civilization was preparing to run away. But Admiral Kim Tae-ho remained silent. Captain Lee So-young, his aide and one of Earth's finest military officers, leaned close to him. Sir, We should contact Earth Command immediately. If we are to join the evacuation, we need to begin preparations now. Kim Tae-ho looked at her. Captain Lee was young, barely 30, but she had seen combat in the border conflicts with space pirates. Hence, her dark eyes were steady, professional. She was a good soldier who understood orders and duty. How long would it take to evacuate Earth? He asked quietly. She thought for a moment. With our current fleet capacity and civilian transport, sir, maybe 40% of the population. If we had a full year in perfect conditions, and the other 60%, her expression did not change. They would remain. Sir. Kim Tae-ho nodded. He had expected that answer. Earth had 8 billion people. Their starships, built for exploration and trade rather than mass evacuation, could never carry them all. Unlike the other species represented here, humanity was still young in the stars. They had not spread across multiple worlds or built the massive fleets that centuries of space travel required. The discussion in the hall was reaching its conclusion. Speaker Veltarian called for order with a sound like crystal bells ringing. The vote is unanimous among all participating species. The great evacuation will begin within 30 standard days. All military assets will be redirected to escort duty. All civilian resources will be allocated to transport and supply operations. The speaker paused and looked directly at Admiral Kim Tae-ho. Admiral, Earth's contribution to the evacuation fleet will be most welcome. Your species may be young, but your ships are well designed for long-range travel. Kim Tae-ho stood slowly. The hall fell silent as every eye turned toward the lone human representative. He could feel the weight of 8 billion lives pressing down on his shoulders. He thought of his daughter on Luna Base, working to build defenses that everyone said were useless. He thought of the farmers and teachers and engineers and artists who had never asked to be born into a galaxy where ancient machines devoured worlds. He thought of home. Speaker Veltarian. With respect to this council and all represented species, Earth abstains from the evacuation. Humanity will remain and fight. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the hall exploded into chaos. Voices rose in a dozen languages, all saying the same thing in different ways. Impossible. Suicide. Madness. The humans had finally revealed their primitive nature, their inability to grasp the reality of the situation. But Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood straight and calm in the storm of alien voices. Captain Lee So-young stepped closer to him, her hand moving instinctively toward her sidearm. Not from fear of the aliens around them, but from the simple reflex of a soldier protecting her commander. You cannot be serious. Speaker Veltarian's crystal voice cut through the noise. Admiral, your species numbers into billions. You would condemn them all to death for the sake of pride. Kim Tae-ho met the alien's multifaceted gaze without flinching. Not pride. Speaker. Hope. Earth is our home. Humanity does not abandon home. The chaos in the hall gradually died down as the reality of the human decision sank in. Here was a species that would rather face certain death than abandon their world. The other representatives looked at Kim Tae-ho with mixtures of pity, confusion, something that might have been respect. As the great meeting ended and the alien delegations began their preparations for exodus, Admiral Kim Tae-ho and Captain Lee So-young stood alone in the emptying hall. Orders, sir? She asked quietly. Kim Tae-ho looked out through the hall's great windows at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, the devourers were coming. But somewhere else, Earth waited for her. Children to come home. Send word to Earth Command. Tell them to recall all ships and personnel. We have a war to fight. The two humans walked out of the hall together, leaving behind the representatives of 50 alien species who had chosen to live on their knees rather than die on their feet. Behind them, the great evacuation began, and ahead of them lay the longest odds in human history. But they were going home, and that made all the difference. 3 months had passed since the great evacuation began. The Sol system looked different now. For once, trade ships from dozens of worlds had filled the space lanes. Now, only human vessels moved between the planets. Earth had become an island. In an ocean of empty space, General Park Minho stood in the command center of Luna Base, watching the main display screen that showed the entire solar system. Red dots marked the positions of Earth Defense Force ships. Blue dots showed the locations of orbital defense platforms. Green dots represented the civilian evacuation ships still arriving from the outer colonies. The evacuation was not going well, sir. We have another refugee convoy arriving from the Proxima stations, Lieutenant Kim Dayun reported from her position at the communications console. 300,000 civilians, mostly families from the mining operations. Park Minho nodded grimly. The outer human colonies had been small compared to Earth, but they still represented millions of people who needed to be brought home before the Devourers arrived. The problem was simple. Not enough ships, not enough time. How many does that? Bring our total to just over 2 million refugees processed through the Luna stations, sir. But we have reports of at least 3 million more still trying to reach us from the outer systems. Top Park Minho closed his eyes for a moment. Mathematics was a cruel master in wartime. Every ship sent to rescue civilians was a ship that could not fight the Devourers. Every day spent on evacuation was a day the enemy moved closer to Earth. On Mars, Dr. Han Jiwoo worked in a laboratory that never slept. The walls were covered with displays showing Devourer technology captured from the wreckage of destroyed colonies. Her team of scientists and engineers worked around the clock, trying to understand an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. The problem was energy. The Devourers did not just destroy worlds, they consumed them. Every piece of matter, every ray of sunlight, every bit of heat was absorbed and converted into power for their machines. It was like trying to fight an enemy that grew stronger by eating your weapons. Dr. Han rubbed her tired eyes and looked at the latest test results. For weeks, her team had been trying to reverse engineer Devour power systems. The breakthrough had come 3 days ago when they realized the machines were not actually consuming matter. They were converting it directly into energy using a process that human science had only theorized about. The energy matrix is unstable. She explained to her assistant, Dr. Yu Jae-min. The conversion process requires perfect harmonic frequency. If we can disrupt that frequency, even for a few seconds, the entire system should cascade into failure. Doctor, you looked skeptical. Even if that works, how do we get close enough to disrupt it? These machines are the size of cities. They're defensive. Systems destroyed entire fleets. Dr. Han smiled for the first time in weeks. Sometimes the best way to deliver a weapon is to make the enemy think it is something else entirely. In the asteroid belt, Commander Choi Dongmin led a squadron of modified mining ships on another hit-and-run mission. The Devourers had started sending scout units ahead of their main fleet, small groups of ships that mapped star systems and identified valuable resources. The human pilots had learned to hunt. These scouts, like ancient warriors hunting wild animals, they used the asteroids for cover, struck without warning, and disappeared before the enemy could respond. It was dangerous work, but it was teaching them valuable lessons about how the Devourers thought and moved. Target acquired, Commander. Pilot Yoon Hai-jin reported from her fighter. Devourer reconnaissance ship, bearing 27 Mark IV. Standard configuration, minimal escort. The enemy ship was roughly the size of a human cruiser. Its dark metal hull covered in sensor arrays and collection devices. It moved through the asteroid field with mechanical precision, cataloging every rock and calculating its mineral content. All units, execute attack pattern Delta, Commander Choi ordered. The human ships came from 6 different directions at once. Modified mining lasers, originally designed to cut through rock, focused their beams on the Devourer's power systems. Converted cargo haulers launched missiles that had been built in the weapon factories hidden throughout the asteroid belt. The enemy ship responded exactly as expected. Its defensive systems calculated the optimal response to each attack, prioritizing threats based on mathematical probabilities. But the humans were not fighting mathematically. They were fighting with desperation and creativity. Yoon Jin dove her fighter directly toward the Devourer's ship's main sensor array, firing continuously. The enemy's defensive systems focused on her as the primary threat, just as the plan required, while every weapon turned toward her small fighter. The other human ships concentrated their fire on the ship's power core. The explosion lit up the asteroid field like a small sun. The light faded. Twisted metal was all that remained of the Devourer's scout. What the victory had cost him. Yoon Hyejin's fighter was gone. It's consumed in the explosion she had helped create. Commander Choi stared at the empty space where her ship had been. She had been 23 years old, fresh from the academy when the war began. Now she was another name on the growing list of heroes who would never see Earth again. The reports from these engagements reached Earth Command every day. Admiral Kim Tae-ho studied each one carefully, looking for patterns and weaknesses in the enemy. The Devourers were not invincible. They could be damaged, destroyed, even outsmarted. But the cost was always high. Captain Lee So-young entered his office, carrying the latest intelligence reports. "Sir, we have confirmation from deep space monitoring stations. The main Devourer fleet has begun moving toward our system. Estimated arrival time is 6 weeks. Kim Tae-ho looked up from his desk. "How many ships?" "The reports are difficult to confirm, but our best estimate is 13 world ships, each with support fleets numbering in the hundreds. Total enemy strength somewhere around 4,000 vessels." Kim Tae-ho was quiet for a long moment. The entire Earth Defense Force numbered less than 800 ships. Most of them converted civilian vessels with minimal weapons. The mathematics were overwhelming. "What about Dr. Han's research?" Captain Lee's expression brightened slightly. "She believes she has found a weakness in their power systems. Her team is working on a weapon prototype, but they need more time for testing." Time was the one thing they did not have on Luna Base. General Park Min-ho received word that the last refugee convoy had arrived from the outer colonies. Nearly 3 million people had been safely evacuated to Earth orbit, but the cost had been enormous. Half of Earth's transport fleet had been lost to Devourer raiders. In the outer colonies were now completely abandoned, but the evacuation had served another purpose. Every refugee ship that reached safety carried information about Devourer tactics and technology. Every survivor who had seen the enemy up close provided another piece of the puzzle. The humans were learning. Dr. Hein Ki-woo made a breakthrough on a Tuesday morning while most of Earth slept. The prototype disruption field generator had finally worked in laboratory conditions, successfully interfering with the captured Devourer power cell. The device was crude and required enormous amounts of energy to operate, but it proved the theory was correct. She immediately contacted Admiral Kim Tae-ho on the secure communication channel. "Admiral, I believe we have found a way to hurt them. The weapon is far from perfect, but if we can get it close enough to their ships, we can disrupt their power systems long enough to destroy them with conventional weapons." Kim Tae-ho felt something he had not experienced in months. "Hoped how close?" "Is close enough." Dr. Han paused before answering. "The field has a maximum range of about 5 kilometers. We would need to get almost within touching distance of their ships." The Admiral was quiet for a moment. In space combat, 5 kilometers was point-blank range. Any ship that got that close to a Devourer vessel would be destroyed within seconds, unless the enemy did not see it coming. Dr. Hunt seemed to read his thoughts. "I have been working on that problem as well, Admiral. I believe we can disguise the field generator inside something the Devourers would want to capture rather than destroy. Kim Tae-ho smiled for the first time since the war began. Sometimes the best weapon was the one the enemy never saw coming. Round him, the command center buzzed with activity as Earth's defenders prepared for the fight of their lives. Above them, stars shone down on a species that refused to surrender, even when surrender was the only logical choice. The Devourers were coming, but humanity would be ready for them. The last defenders of Earth had found their hope. The news traveled faster than light itself across the galaxy. In the evacuation fleets heading toward Andromeda, alien commanders received reports that seemed impossible to believe. The humans had won their first major battle against the Devourers. Commander Velthus of the Regilian fleet read the intelligence report 3 times before accepting it was real. A human task force had destroyed an entire Devourer harvester group near the Titan mining stations. Not damaged or delayed, but completely destroyed. Ships that had consumed entire worlds were now nothing but drifting metal in space. Many of his fellow commanders dismissed the reports as propaganda or mistakes in translation. The Devourers could not be defeated by primitive weapons and desperate tactics. But Velthus had fought alongside humans during the border conflicts 20 years ago. He knew they were capable of impossible things when their backs were against the wall on Earth. The victory celebration was brief. Admiral Kim Tae-ho knew that one battle did not win a war, especially when the enemy still had thousands of ships heading toward Earth. But the victory had proven something important. The Devourers could be beaten. Dr. Han Ji-woo worked with new energy in her Mars laboratory. The success of her disruption field generator had opened new possibilities for human weapons. She had teams working around the clock to build more generators, each one smaller and more powerful than the last. Breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Engineer Lim Kyung-soo, who had spent his career designing mining equipment for the asteroid belt, suggested using the natural resources of space itself as weapons. The asteroid belt contained millions of rocks, each one a potential missile, if properly guided. Dr. Han, what if we do not try to build traditional weapons at all? Lim said during one of their planning meetings. What if we turned the entire solar system into our weapon? Dr. Han looked at the engineer with new interest. Explain. Lim activated a holographic display showing the asteroid belt. We have mining stations throughout this region. Each station has powerful engines designed to move asteroids. If we modify these engines and add Dr. Han's disruption generators, we can turn every asteroid into a guided missile. The plan was ambitious, beyond anything humans had attempted before. It would require converting hundreds of mining stations into weapon platforms, coordinating attacks across millions of kilometers of space, timing everything perfectly to catch the Devourers by surprise. Admiral Kim Tae-ho approved the plan. Immediately, Operation Prometheus began 3 weeks before the Devourer main fleet reached the outer edge of the solar system. Human work crews, many of them volunteers from Earth's civilian population, spread out across the asteroid belt. They worked in conditions that would have been considered impossible before the war. No backup, no safety protocols, and no second chances. Teacher Jung Soo-ben had never worked in space before the war began. Now she led a team of converted civilians who were installing disruption generators inside asteroids near the belt's outer edge. Her team included former farmers, students, and shopkeepers who had learned to operate heavy machinery in zero gravity. The work was dangerous. Spacesuits could fail, cutting tools could malfunction, and the Devourers sent scout ships through the asteroid belt every few days. But the humans kept working, driven by the knowledge that their planet depended on them. The first test of the new weapons came when a Devourer reconnaissance force entered the belt 2 weeks early. The enemy ships moved in perfect formation, their sensors mapping every asteroid and calculating its mineral value. They had no idea that many of those asteroids were now weapons waiting to strike. Engineer Lim Kung-Soo watched from his command station as the enemy ships approached the first converted mining station. The Devourers had detected the station, but classified it as a standard mining operation. It's not worth their immediate attention. All stations, prepare for activation. Lim spoke into his communication device. Remember, we only get one chance at surprise. The asteroids began to move. Hundreds of them, each one guided by modified mining engines and carrying a disruption field generator. From the enemy's perspective, it looked like a natural asteroid shower caused by gravitational disturbances. The Devourers realized their mistake too late. The first asteroid struck their lead ships before the enemy could react. The disruption fields activated on impact, causing the Devourer power systems to fail, just as Dr. Han had predicted. Without their energy shields and weapons, the massive ships were helpless against the continuing asteroid bombardment. Within an hour, the entire reconnaissance force was destroyed. The humans had turned the asteroid belt into the largest minefield in galactic history. But the victory came with a terrible cost. The Devourers' main fleet, detecting the destruction of their scouts, changed course and accelerated toward Earth. They were no longer treating humanity as a minor threat to be consumed at leisure. Now they saw humans as an enemy that required their full attention. Captain Ominsiok received his orders on a cold morning in what had once been the peaceful research station orbiting Jupiter. His mission was simple to understand and impossible to survive. He was to take his ship, the converted asteroid hauler Defiance, and attack the Devourer staging area beyond the orbit of Pluto. The ship had been modified with the largest disruption field generator ever built. Dr. Han had warned him that the device was experimental and untested at such size. It might not work at all, or it might work too well and destroy his ship along with the enemy. Captain No looked at his crew of 30 volunteers. They were mostly young people who had joined the Earth Defense Force after the war began. Them had expected to fight aliens when they signed up for military service, but here they were, preparing for a mission that would determine the fate of their world. We are not coming back from this one, O told them honestly. The mission requires us to get close enough to the enemy to activate the generator. At that range, will not survive the explosion. Not one member of his crew asked to be reassigned. The journey to the outer system took 4 days. They traveled in complete silence, their ship's engines producing minimal energy to avoid detection. The Devourer staging area was a collection of massive ships and construction facilities, preparing for the final assault on Earth. Captain O had never seen anything like it. The enemy ships were arranged in perfect geometric patterns, their dark holes reflecting no light. Construction robots moved between the vessels, making repairs and adjustments with mechanical precision. It was like looking at a nightmare version of an industrial complex. Bring us in close to the largest concentration of ships. O ordered his pilot. We need to maximize the effect of the disruption field. The Defiance moved through the enemy formation like a ghost. The Devourer's sensors were focused on detecting threats from Earth, not small ships approaching from empty space. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. Captain O activated the disruption generator. Just as the first enemy weapons began firing at his ship, the explosion that followed was visible from Earth, a new star burning. Briefly, in the darkness of space, the effect on the Devourer fleet was devastating. The massive disruption field interfered with every power system within 1,000 kilometers. Ships that had operated perfectly for millions of years suddenly found their computers failing, to their weapons shutting down, and their engines producing contradictory commands. But the most important effect was something no one had predicted. The disruption field had created a tear in space itself, a barrier that trapped nearly half of the main Devourer fleet in a subspace distortion. They were still alive, but they could not reach Earth. Admiral Kim Tae-ho received the report. Wow, standing in Earth's orbital command center. Capt. U. Sacrifice had cut the enemy's strength in half, but it had also made the remaining Devourers desperate. They were now racing toward Earth at maximum speed, abandoning all caution. The final battle would begin in less than a week. Dr. Han Chu worked feverishly to prepare Earth's defenses for the coming assault. Her disruption generators were now installed in every orbital platform, every defense satellite, and every ship in the human fleet. But she knew it would not be enough. The Devourers still outnumbered humanity by a significant margin that evening. She stood on the observation deck of her Mars laboratory and looked toward Earth. The blue planet hung in space like a jewel. Unaware that the greatest battle in human history was about to begin, she thought about her daughter, safe in one of Earth's underground shelters. She thought about all the children who would never know the fear that had consumed the adult world. For the past months, they would either grow up free or they would not grow up at all. Dr. Han returned to her laboratory and continued working. There were still weapons to build, still miracles to achieve. The Devourers were coming, but humanity had one advantage. The enemy could never understand. They were fighting for their home, and humans never surrendered their home without a fight that would be remembered forever. The alarm bells echoed through every human settlement, from Mars to Earth's moon. The remaining Devourer fleet had arrived at the edge of the solar system, and they were moving fast. 6 massive world ships, accompanied by over 2,000 smaller vessels, bore down on humanity's home with the fury of machines that had been denied their prize for too long. General Park Min-ho stood in the Luna Base Command Center, watching the tactical display as enemy ships spread across the outer system like a disease. The numbers were still overwhelming, even after Captain O's sacrifice had trapped half their fleet. But numbers had never been humanity's strength anyway. "All defense stations report ready, sir," Lieutenant Kim Dae-yoon announced from her position. "Earth orbital platforms are online. Mars defense grid is operational. Asteroid belt weapons are standing by for your command." Park Min-ho nodded grimly. Every human military asset was now positioned for the battle that would determine their species' survival. But he knew that ships and weapons would not be enough. This fight would be won by the people inside those ships. The civilians who had refused to run, and a stubborn human refusal to accept defeat. On Earth below, the preparation was unlike anything the planet had ever seen. Teacher Jung Soo-bin had returned from the asteroid belt to organize civilian defense teams in her home city of Seoul. Her students, some barely 18 years old, worked alongside retired veterans to prepare ground-based weapons. "Miss Young, the Defense Ministry wants to know our readiness status." Her former student Kim Min-jin spoke from behind a hastily constructed barricade. The boy had been studying literature 6 months ago. Now he carried a military radio and wore the uniform of Earth's Planetary Defense Force. "Tell them we are as ready as we can be," Jung Soo-bin replied, checking the power levels on their improvised energy weapons. These devices had been built in factories that once produced consumer electronics, designed by engineers who had learned to make war instead of peace. Similar scenes played out across Earth. In New York, farmer Bei Woo-jin led a team of agricultural workers who had converted their farming equipment into mobile weapon platforms. In London, factory workers operated assembly lines that produced ammunition around the clock. In Tokyo, computer programmers wrote targeting software for weapons. That had not existed a year ago. The civilians refused evacuation orders. They had nowhere left to run, and many of them had decided they would rather die fighting on their home soil than live as refugees among the stars. Dr. Han Ji-woo watched the approaching enemy fleet from her Mars laboratory with mixed feelings. Her disruption-filled technology was now installed throughout the human defense network. But she had discovered something troubling during her final tests. The Devourers were adapting to her weapons faster than she had expected. The enemy's artificial intelligence was learning from each encounter, developing countermeasures to human tactics. The machines that had once been predictable were becoming unpredictable themselves, development that terrified her more than their superior numbers. "Admiral, we have a problem." She spoke into the secure communication channel to Earth Command. "The Devourers are modifying their power systems. My disruption fields are becoming less effective with each engagement." "Admiral," Kim Taeho's voice crackled back through the static. "K, how much less effective?" Dr. Han looked at her test results one more time before answering. "At current adaptation rates, K, the disruption fields will be completely useless within 72 hours. The timeline for the battle had just become much shorter. Captain Lee Soyoung prepared her ship Indomitable for what everyone knew would be the most desperate mission in human history. Her task force consisted of 50 converted civilian vessels, each one carrying a disruption field generator and a crew of volunteers who understood they were not expected to survive. Their target was the largest Devourer world ship, a vessel so massive it had its own gravitational field. Intelligence reports suggested it contained the central command systems for the entire enemy fleet. They could destroy or disable it, while the Devourer ships might lose coordination. The plan was insane by any reasonable military standard. They would fly directly into the mouth of the enemy formation, penetrating defenses that had destroyed entire civilizations. But reasonable military standards had been abandoned the day humanity chose to fight instead of flee. "Captain, we are receiving volunteers from across the system," a communications officer reported. "Ships from the outer colonies, civilian transports, even private yachts. Everyone wants to join the attack." Lee So-young felt a mixture of pride and sorrow. Humanity's greatest strength had always been their willingness to stand together when everything seemed lost. But that same strength was about to cost them thousands of lives. "Tell them we appreciate the offer, but this mission requires specific equipment and training," she replied. "Their job is to protect Earth while we are gone." The Devourer fleet reached Mars orbit just as the first wave of human defenders moved to intercept them. The battle began with long-range weapons fire that lit up space like a deadly fireworks display. Human missiles and energy beams struck enemy ships with precision guided by months of practice and sacrifice. But the Devourers responded with overwhelming firepower that made human weapons look like toys. Massive energy beams cut through human ships like knives through paper. Orbital defense platforms that had taken months to build were destroyed in seconds. Commander Choi Dong-min led the fighter squadrons in desperate hit-and-run attacks against the enemy's smaller ships. His pilots, veterans of the asteroid belt campaigns, used every trick they had learned to stay alive in the killing field that space had become. Break formation and attack individual targets, he ordered over the radio. "Do not let them concentrate their fire. Make them work for every kill." The human fighters scattered like leaves in a hurricane, but they kept fighting. Each pilot knew that every enemy ship they delayed or damaged was one less threat to Earth. Some of them sang songs over the radio as they flew into certain death. Others simply flew in silence, focusing on their duty. On Luna Base, General Park, Minho watched his carefully planned defenses crumble under the enemy assault. The Devourers were not just defeating human forces, they were learning from each engagement and adapting their tactics in real time, sir. "We are losing the outer defense perimeter," Lieutenant Kim Dae-yoon reported with professional calm that hid her fear. "Mars orbital platforms are down to 30% operational status. The asteroid belt weapons have exhausted their ammunition." Park Min-ho made the hardest decision of his military career. "All remaining forces fall back to Earth orbit. Make our final stand here." The retreat was orderly but heartbreaking. Ships that had fought bravely for hours now ran for their lives as the Devourer fleet advanced like a mechanical tide. Behind them, the outer solar system burned with the wreckage of humanity's first line of defense. Dr. Han Ji-woo made her final preparations as the enemy fleet approached. Mars, her laboratory, would be overrun within hours, but she had one last surprise for the Devourers. Hidden throughout her research facility were experimental disruption devices, more powerful than anything she had built before. These devices were too unstable for normal use, too dangerous to install on ships or stations. But they were perfect for a laboratory that was about to be destroyed anyway. She recorded a final message for her daughter on Earth before activating the weapons. The explosion that consumed her laboratory and 3 nearby Devourer ships was visible from Earth, a brief star that marked the sacrifice of one of humanity's greatest minds. Captain Lee So-young's task force reached the edge of the Devourer formation just as Dr. Han's laboratory exploded. The enemy's attention was focused on the destruction behind them, giving the human ships a few precious seconds of surprise. All ships began final approach. Lee So-young ordered, "Member, we only need to get one disruption generator close enough to their command ship. Every ship that does not make it through makes it easier for the others." The human ships dove into the enemy formation like bullets, to small size and desperate tactics, confusing the Devourer defense systems. Ships exploded around Lee So-young as she guided King Dominable toward the massive world ship at the center of the enemy fleet. The virus that Dr. Han had created was loaded into her ship's computer systems, waiting for the moment when they could transmit it directly into the enemy's network. It was humanity's last weapon, a piece of code designed to do something the Devourers had never experienced: make them doubt themselves as Earth's blue surface grew larger in the viewports of the approaching enemy fleet. Captain Lee So-young prepared to deliver that doubt directly into the heart of their artificial minds. The final phase of the battle for Earth was about to begin. The last orbital defense platform around Earth exploded in a shower of metal and fire. From the surface below, millions of humans looked up at the night sky and saw their final defenses dying one by one. The Devourer fleet hung above their world, like mechanical vultures, preparing to feast on everything humanity had ever built. General Park Minho stood in what remained of Luna Base's command center. Half the station had been destroyed by enemy fire, but the humans inside refused to surrender. Through the cracked windows, he could see Devourer ships beginning their descent toward Earth's atmosphere. Sir, Captain Lee's team has reached the enemy command ship, Lieutenant Kim Da-yoon reported from her damaged console. They are requesting permission to begin the final phase. Park Min-ho closed his eyes for a moment. Captain Lee So-young and her volunteers were about to attempt something that had never been tried before: infiltrating a Devourer world ship and planting a virus directly into their central computer systems. The chances of success were almost zero, but almost zero was better than no chance at all. Permission granted. Tell them Earth is proud of them. Inside the massive Devourer command ship, Captain Lee So-young and her surviving crew members fought their way through corridors filled with mechanical defenders. The ship's interior was like a nightmare version of a factory, with walls covered in cables and processing units that pulsed with alien energy. Her team had been reduced to 12 people from the original 50 who had started the mission. Each member carried a copy of Dr. Han's virus, assurance against the possibility that not all of them would reach the central computer core. The virus was more than just a computer program. Dr. Han had designed it to introduce something completely foreign to the Devourer mindset: uncertainty. The machines had operated on pure logic for millions of years, never questioning their purpose or doubting their calculations. The virus would force them to experience doubt for the first time. "Captain, we have located the central processing chamber," Sergeant Yu Jung-ho called from ahead. "Heavy defenses, but we can reach it if we move fast." Lee So-young looked at her remaining team members. They were tired, wounded, and far from home, but their eyes still burned with a determination that had brought humanity this far. "Remember, we only need one person to reach the core and upload the virus. Everyone else's job is to make sure that happens. On Earth's surface, the civilian population prepared for the final battle. Teacher Jung Soo-bin stood with her students on the roof of their school, watching enemy ships descend through the atmosphere. The converted farming equipment and improvised weapons they had built seemed pathetic compared to the massive machines approaching their city, but they would not run. Every human settlement on Earth had made the same choice. We'd fight until the end, even if the end came in the next few hours. Miss Young, should we contact the other defense teams? Student Kim Min-jin asked, his young voice steady despite the fear they all felt. No need. Jung Soo-bin replied, checking her weapon one final time. They know what to do. We all know what to do. Across the planet, similar scenes played out in every major city. Farmer Bae Woo-jin led his agricultural workers in Seoul, preparing to defend their neighborhoods with tractors converted into combat vehicles. In New York, factory workers manned rooftop positions with weapons they had built in the same facilities where they once made consumer goods. The Devourers had never faced an enemy like this. Every previous species they had encountered had military forces that could be defeated and civilian populations that would surrender. But humanity refused to separate its soldiers from its citizens. Every human was a defender. Every building, a fortress. Inside the Devourer command ship, Captain Lee's team reached the central processing chamber. The room was enormous, filled with computing systems that stretched from floor to ceiling. At the center stood a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with the combined intelligence of the entire Devourer fleet. Enemy defenders swarmed into the chamber as soon as the humans appeared. Mechanical soldiers with energy weapons began firing immediately, forcing Lee's team to take cover behind the computer terminals they had come to destroy. Go, go, go. Lee shouted over the sound of weapons fire. Upload the virus now. Sergeant Yu Jung-ho sprinted toward the central crystal, carrying the data storage device that contained Dr. Han's creation. Enemy fire cut him down just meters from his target, but he managed to throw the device to Corporal Kim Soo-jin before he fell. Kim Soo-jin caught the device and continued running. She reached the crystal and began connecting the upload cable just as an energy beam struck her in the shoulder. With her last conscious act, she activated the upload sequence. The virus entered the Devourer network like poison flowing through veins. Within seconds, it had spread to every ship in the fleet, every processing unit, every decision-making system. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers began to doubt themselves. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Ships that had been moving in perfect formation suddenly changed course as their navigation systems questioned their own calculations. Weapons that had fired with mechanical precision began missing their targets as targeting computers second-guessed their aim. On Luna Base, General Park Min-ho watched in amazement as the enemy fleet began to turn on itself. Devourer ships were firing at each other, their confused systems unable to distinguish between friend and foe. The virus had done more than disrupt their operations. It had shattered their fundamental understanding of reality. Admiral Kim Tae-ho received the reports from his command center on Earth. The impossible was happening. The Devourer fleet, moments away from total victory, was destroying itself through confusion and doubt. But the victory came at a terrible price. Captain Lee So-young and her entire team were lost in the explosion that consumed the enemy command ship. Their sacrifice had saved humanity, but they would never see the world they had died to protect. The remaining Devourer ships, their command, structure completely compromised, attempted to retreat from the solar system, but humanity had learned their patterns, their weaknesses, their fears. Commander Choi Dong-man led pursuit squadrons that hunted down the survivors with relentless efficiency. The machines that had consumed worlds for millions of years were finally experiencing something they had never known. Defeat. Dr. Han, Jiwoo's daughter, Dr. Lee Minna, worked in the underground laboratories beneath Seoul, monitoring the virus's effects on captured devourer technology. Her mother's final creation was exceeding all expectations, spreading through enemy systems faster than anyone had hoped. The virus was not just introducing doubt, it was teaching the devourers to fear. For beings of pure logic, fear was a completely alien concept that their systems could not process. Many enemy ships simply shut down rather than continue operating with such uncertainty. General Park Min-ho sent the message that Earth had been waiting to hear. All devourer ships have been destroyed or have fled the system. Earth is secure. Humanity has won. The celebration that followed was unlike anything in human history. People emerged from shelters and defense positions to see a sky free of enemy ships for the first time in months. Children who had grown up during the war could finally play outside without fear. But the victory belonged to more than just Earth. Throughout the galaxy, the fleeing alien civilizations received transmissions from Sol System. The impossible had happened. The devourers were defeated. Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood in the ruins of his command center and composed the message that would travel to every corner of the galaxy. His words were simple but carried the weight of everything humanity had sacrificed to achieve this moment. To all civilizations who fled before the devourer threat. This is Admiral Kim Tae-ho of Earth. The enemy has been defeated. The galaxy is safe. Your worlds await your return. He paused, thinking of Captain Lee So-young, Dr. Han Ji-woo, Captain Oh Min-seok, and all the others who had given their lives for this victory. Humanity stood and fought when others could not. We held the line not because we were the strongest, but because this was our home. When every other species fled, we remained. And we won. The message spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that had been silent since the great evacuation began in the Andromeda galaxy. Alien commanders who had dismissed humanity as primitive and foolish now read reports of the impossible victory with growing amazement. Commander Velthus of the Regelian fleet was among the first to order his ships to begin the long journey home. As he looked at the tactical reports from Sol System, he finally understood what he had witnessed at the council meeting months ago. The humans had not been displaying primitive stubbornness when they refused to evacuate. They had been showing courage. On Earth, the work of rebuilding began immediately. Cities damaged by the final battle needed repair. Orbital platforms had to be reconstructed. The asteroid belt mining stations required new equipment to replace what had been converted into weapons. But the humans approached this work with the same determination they had shown in war. Teacher Jung Soo-bin returned to her classroom, but now she taught students who had seen the galaxy at its darkest hour and watched their species light a fire that burned away the darkness. Farmer Bei Wu Jen went back to his fields, growing F.